Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 987 for January 15th, 2023. Coming up in a few minutes.
There was, no long-term plans for a career in whiskey. But like most people, once you set foot into a distillery, it changes things for you. And it definitely changed things for me.
Sarah Burgess has held a lot of different positions through her 25-plus years in the whiskey industry, from a seasonal tour guide at Cardew Distillery to managing 3 different Diageo distilleries, making whiskey for the Macallan, and now she's the new whiskey maker at the Lakes Distillery in England. We'll catch up with Sarah Burgess later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and much more, all on this week's WhiskyCast.
Hey friends, Gabriel Cardarella here with Dewar's Scotch Whisky, and I can't wait to introduce you to the new Dewar's 12-year hitting shelves this holiday season. More a little later in this episode of WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever wondered where Redbreast got its name? Well, let's go back to 1912 and be glad our bird-watching founder didn't spot the bar-tailed godwit that day.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. A couple of months ago, I mentioned the Scottish Government's public consultation on potential alcohol marketing and sales restrictions, and now a line in that report has the Scotch whisky industry in an uproar. The report claimed all alcohol products in each beverage subsector, quote, are essentially variations of the same thing. That's like saying a bottle of 30-year-old single malt scotch and a cheap supermarket label blend are the same thing. The Scotch Whisky Association has deep concerns about the government consultation, which could lead to strict limits on how alcoholic beverages are sold and promoted. A spokesman for the SNP-led government said the consultation is intended to get a wide range of opinions, and no legislation is being introduced at this stage. Whiskey is Scotland's number 2 overall export, and whiskey exports were worth £4.5 billion in 2021. The 2022 data has not yet been released. Meanwhile, Irish whiskey exports set a new record in 2022, breaking €1 billion for the first time ever. Global sales exceeded 14 million cases, according to a new report from the Irish Whiskey Association. Key drivers of the export gains include a growing demand for premium Irish whiskies, along with market diversification, especially in Africa and Asia. Sales have been hurt by the war in Ukraine, which was one of the fastest-growing markets for Irish whiskey in Europe, and sales to Russia have essentially ceased following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russia had previously been the second-largest export market for Irish whiskey behind the United States. Russia and Ukraine together accounted for 7% of total Irish whiskey exports in 2021. Here's something that might make whiskey makers a bit nervous. Tequila has surpassed American whiskey to become the second most valuable spirits category in the U.S. by value. That's according to IWSR Drinks Market Analysis, which projects tequila will take over the number 1 spot from vodka this year. However, whiskeys of all types outpaced vodka sales during 2022 for the first time in almost 2 decades, with a 3% total gain in sales volume. U.S. whiskey sales were up 4%, with bourbon showing an 8% gain. Last time around, I mentioned that Gordon & MacPhail plans to turn its shop in Elgin, Scotland into a new visitor experience. The family-owned company has now closed the shop for a year's worth of construction and has opened a satellite shop on Elgin's High Street to handle mail orders. Gordon & MacPhail's Stephen Rankin explained this week that the family needs to keep up with changes in whiskey and tourism.
Retailing's evolved significantly, and today it's more so than ever, it has to be an experience. And of course, what we're surrounded by is wonderful experiences in terms of distilleries. So we thought how do we bring to life the Gordon MacPhail story while complementing the distilleries of Speyside and the rest of Scotland? And of course, Gordon MacPhail have been filling with over 100 distilleries throughout our 127-year history. And so we're in a situation that we thought about how under one roof you could bring not just the story of the evolution of Scotch whisky from, distillers to blenders to single malt, and of course through the lens of Gordon MacPhail, very much using that sort of, as George Urquhart was proclaimed the sort of grandfather of single malts, but tell that story. But also you could very much complementing our peers in the industry is tell the story of flavour and how the understanding of maturation is so significant into complementing the distillery characteristics of whisky, and bringing that to light and giving people the opportunity to sample whiskies going back to the 1930s through to present day from such a wide range of distilleries, and give really unique insights, experiences in terms of drinking whisky.
Gordon and MacPhail shut down its grocery business during the pandemic, but the South Street shop remains a link to 127 years of history.
We're still the last merchant to still trade. I have the original location where the business started as a trading site. The Matthew Gloag and the Chivas brothers and even Johnny Walker. None of these guys still exist in their original locations, where Gordon MacPhail is the last merchant in Scotland to do that. So it's wonderful. It's a sense of place. And I think that's what a lot of visitors want as well, that real sense of place, people, and that identity that comes with that. The history and the heritage that go is second to none. So we had a real thirst as a family to retain the building and make the most of it.
There are plans to keep the satellite shop as a wine and spirits retailer after the South Street location reopens, should it be successful. In other news, Glendronach is out with the 11th release of its cask-strength single malt. It's matured in a combination of PX and Oloroso sherry casks, and it's bottled at 59.8% ABV. It carries a recommended retail price of $100 a bottle. And Heaven Hill is out with the year's first batch of Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. Batch A123 is a 12-year-old bourbon, bottled at 62.8% ABV. It carries a recommended retail price in the U.S. of $69.99 a bottle. I'll have tasting notes for it soon at the WhiskyCast website. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and our social media timelines. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. Whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events. It's a busy week in Western Canada. The Edmonton MS Whiskey Festival is Wednesday night, followed the next night by the Calgary MS Whiskey Festival and the start of the Victoria Whiskey Festival in Victoria, British Columbia, with the Canadian Whiskey Awards that night. The Kentucky Derby Museum in Louisville kicks off its annual Bourbon Legends series of tastings with the folks from Michter's Distillery Thursday night. Tickets are still available. The Brandy Library in New York City starts its winter spirit school classes with a great Scotches tasting class this coming Saturday, which also brings us the National Whiskey Festival in Glasgow, Scotland. Hansa Spirit is January 26th through the 28th in Hamburg, Germany. The Bergen Beer and Whiskey Festival is that same weekend in Bergen, Norway. And the Chicago Winter Whiskey Festival is on the 28th. If you're organizing a whiskey event, please let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendar at whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Kentucky and Ireland have plenty in common. Two homes of horse racing, Bluegrass music is said to have Irish roots. Okay, it's not the longest list, but the Redbreast Kentucky Oak Edition only strengthens the bond. Finished in sustainably sourced Kentucky oak for a captivating nose and round taste. I see a triple crown in this thoroughbred's future.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. The Lakes Distillery introduced its new whiskey maker this week. Sarah Burgess was previously part of the Macallan's whiskey-making team. She's also managed 3 distilleries for Diageo and served as creative director for the Craigellachie Hotel. I caught up with Sarah this week on a Zoom call. What do you bring to the Lakes Distillery that is going to shake up the whiskeys there?
I think my own creativity, I love to look and it's almost listen to the casks, Each cask has got a different story to tell, each whiskey with its own unique quirks almost, and how those whiskies come together and what they create. I mean, there's no doubt that the whiskies that have been created from the lakes up until now have been absolutely phenomenal. So I really hope I can continue that.
And of course, those whiskeys were created by Davil Gandhi, who you worked with at the Macallan, right?
The funny thing is, I joined Macallan just as he left, and now I'm joining the lakes as he leaves, so I just follow him around.
Going to see where he winds up next, right?
Exactly.
What about the difference between being a distillery manager and being a blender? Because I know you managed 2 distilleries earlier in your career for Diageo. There's always that sort of tension between the manager and the blender in terms of making whiskeys. How do you approach it from having seen it from both sides now?
I think having seen it from both sides and having that experience from both sides, that helps me be a much more balanced whiskey maker or blender. I really appreciate the difficulties within production. And, that's why this role is so great at the Lakes, because I have responsibility for the production and also for whiskey making, which makes it much easier for me to make the tweaks that I would like inside the distillery for what I would like to see in the new make spirit character. The Lakes has got great flexibility with having both stainless steel and copper condensers, so it's got that flexibility to push the new make spirit character in other directions.
How long will it take for you to put your own stamp on their whiskeys?
Well, it's going to take me a wee while to get through nosing all the stock and listening to what all the whiskies have got to say and see how they go together. And of course, Davil is in the process of leaving the Lakes, but we're going to work together to go through the 2023 releases before then I take over completely. So it's not going to be, I wouldn't think, until 2024 before we see any Lakes whiskey made by Sarah Burgess.
How did you get started in whiskey in the first place?
I actually started working at Cardew Distillery, and I started on my 21st birthday. So most people didn't have much success planned for me in the whiskey industry because they thought that whilst I'm giving out whiskies to guests on my birthday, I might just join them and celebrate, and it might be the shortest job in history. But, living in Speyside and growing up in Speyside, distilleries are everywhere. And when that's the environment in which you grow up, you think that's normal because it's your normal, right? So it took me quite a bit of time to really appreciate how special Speyside is. And I think, like most people, it took me a bit of maturity to appreciate the flavours of whiskey. So when I started, it was purely to be a summer job, and there was, no long-term plans for a career in whiskey. But like most people, once you set foot into a distillery, it changes things for you. And it definitely changed things for me. I became so almost addicted to the passion that surrounds the whiskey industry, and I wanted to learn more and more and more. And fortunately for me, Diageo was an excellent employer, an excellent promoter of development. So whilst I worked there as a seasonal tour guide, I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to move into different roles, and they supported me through my general certificate in distilling through the Institute of Brewing and Distilling, and they also supported me through my BA Honours Management degree from Robert Gordon's University. So that helped me to, be promoted and ultimately end up working as a senior site manager. So when I started being a seasonal tour guide, that's almost the bottom of the ladder in the distillery. And when I left as a senior site manager, I'd made it to the top job in the distillery. So that's a fantastic achievement. And I just wanted to learn more and more and more. And when I was working at Oban Distillery, the opportunity came up at Macallan, and I thought, well, I've had lots of experience looking after maturation warehouses, managing distilleries, a bit of exposure to dark grains plants. So I thought, what else do I want to know and learn about in whiskey? And whiskey making always really intrigued me. And I always knew that I had a good sense of smell. When you're conducting whiskey tastings for people and you're talking about all of these levels of aromas and characteristics that you can find, and sometimes you're met with some blank faces because people are just not identifying things at the same depth or with the same detail. And it's not that they don't agree, it's just that, smelling it and being able to open that filing cabinet in the brain to access what that smell is, it's something familiar, but they can't quite articulate it. And I think that's a lot of where the skill sits. It's being able to connect what you smell with what it actually is, because so many times you see it in tastings, people, oh, I know that smell, I know it, and they just can't get the words out. So yeah, I always knew that I had that ability, but I wasn't, I didn't know, would I make a good whiskey maker? Would I be able to do it? And thankfully, Macallan provided that opportunity for me, and it was a great experience, brilliant learning, and I hope that I continue to make some great whiskies.
Can nosing skills be taught, or is it natural? Is it something you're born with?
So I think the ability to smell, and if you look in research, smell, it was always believed in history that smell was a sense that you could survive without. But, I definitely don't go to that belief. I think that you can be taught to an extent, but I think the bulk of it is, the basic physiology and the amount of organoleptic receptors that you have as a human. And of course, as a female, we have more organoleptic receptors than men. So here's one case where we can definitely say that we're better than men.
I was about to ask about that and the gender difference, because we know that men do not have as many organoleptic receptors as women do, but does that make women better blenders?
I think the ability to be able to connect what you smell to what it actually is, and that doesn't make there's no gender difference there. That's the ability of the brain and how it works. So yeah, there are amazing blenders in this world, both male and female. So I would never say that all the women blenders are better.
Tell me about your time at the Craigellachie Hotel, where you were a creative director. It must have been an interesting time for you.
I've had a great time in the last year, to be honest. Working with Piers, who owns the Craigellachie Hotel, we were focused on creating a luxury collection to reflect Speyside. And being from Speyside and being proud of being from Speyside, I thought it was a really, really good opportunity. I think it's partly about the Scottish nature and our overall culture. We don't shout and promote what we have, but Speyside is the equivalent to Champagne in France. We're developing in Speyside the bulk of Scotland's whiskies. It is a luxurious valley with Walpole businesses here, all luxurious items, cashmere, Baxters and Walkers from the food, and of course the whiskies. So the thing that I focused on the most over the last year was a brand called Space Soda. So I have developed a range of soft drinks and mixers called Space Soda. And the original concept was to create flavors to complement the highball, because I love the highball, and I think the highball is one of those cocktails that's so easy. Anyone can make it. You don't need to be in a fancy bar in order to get a highball, because most places have a tall glass, whiskey, ice, and some kind of mixer. So the idea was to create, something that complemented whiskey. What's actually been created is a range of sodas that are quite brilliant, and they work out across the range of all spirits. Each of them, they're all made from water from Speyside, and the botanicals, where possible, have been sourced from Speyside. And if you took an aerial view of the River Spey, you see the river flowing through the valley. And if you just consider that to be a big blue chunk, and the green hills around, running down the banks of the river are the yellow flowers of the gorse bush. And the gorse bush obviously has got a wonderful aromatic nature. And I've been able to find someone within the area that takes a gorse extract. So gorse is the key ingredient in all of the sodas. So created so far is a ginger ale, a grapefruit soda, and obviously those two flavours, you can't find ginger and grapefruit in abundance in Speyside, so we've had to bring them in. We have an apple soda, a tonic, and a light tonic, and there of course will be still and sparkling water. And I will continue to work with Space Soda on a part-time basis and be a non-exec director for that business.
Are you going to move down to the Lakes District, or are you going to stay in Speyside?
I love Speyside, so I've been really fortunate. I've been able to get this hybrid role where I'll work from home and go down to the distillery, on a monthly basis with the regular frequency. And of course now I think that's one of the plus points actually of COVID, because pre-COVID that concept would just not have been possible. But now, everyone's got so much better at working using Zoom, Teams, whatever that online meeting resource is, and it feels like you're in the same room. So, I think it's going to work well.
Is that also going to help you in terms of being an ambassador for the Lakes too, in terms of not having to travel as much?
Well, it'll still make me quite convenient for the airports here, Aberdeen or Inverness, so I'll be able to fly anywhere that I need to for the Lakes, because, I do intend to represent the distillery and do quite a bit of travel for the distillery. And I look forward to, spending time in the Lakes and getting to know that part of the country, because, up until I went down to visit the distillery last year, I hadn't been to the Lake District before. And a lot of time when you're driving around, the scenery is very reminiscent of Scotland.
You could have had your choice of any distillery that you wanted to work at after coming out of the Macallan and working at the Craigellachie Hotel. Why the Lakes?
It's new, it's young, it's fun. I think there's lots of opportunity for innovation, and the product itself is really, really good. So, yeah, I like the story. I like where they've been so far, and I really am quite excited to be part of their story.
How will you define success at the Lakes? Is it by awards received? Is it by sales increases? How do you define your success?
I think it's a combination. It's about the consumer loyalty that already exists for the lakes. It's maintaining that. It's seeing an increase in sales. It's looking at consumer review. What do people think about the products, and whether that review comes in the fashion of awards or just, letters and emails back into the distillery about, what people think of the product. And, often with a whiskey's there to tell a story, and not all stories will be for you, And I think that as long as you understand what was the purpose of this whiskey, what story is it telling? So when there are comments that can be perceived as negative, that's actually just part of that whiskey, and that's okay too.
Thanks to Sarah Burgess for spending some time with us on this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. And since Sarah Burgess started off her career at Cardew Distillery as a seasonal tour guide, let's start off this week with the Cardew entry in Diageo's 2022 Special Releases series. This one is a 16-year-old single malt finished in Jamaican rum casks and bottled at cask strength, 58% ABV. The nose has touches of tropical fruits, dried flowers, and a hint of jasmine. The taste is rich and lush with notes of pineapple, banana, baking spices, honey, vanilla, and a hint of oak that comes out as the spices start to fade. The finish is long and fruity with hints of oak and lingering spices. I'm scoring the Cardew 16-year-old from the 2022 Diageo Special Releases collection a 94. Next up, the Angel's Envy Cask Strength 2022 edition. As always, this one is finished in port wine casks, and it's bottled at 59.9% ABV. The nose has touches of berry preserves, caramel, vanilla, and hints of honey and butterscotch. The taste is thick and chewy with fresh berries, cinnamon, and a hint of nutmeg, along with almond oil, honey, and butterscotch. The finish is long with a lingering spiciness, and I'm scoring the 2022 Angel's Envy Cask Strength Bourbon a 93. And finally, Journeyman Distillery in Michigan releases an unusually named whiskey from time to time, Corset's Whips and Whiskey. It's not because of any particular kink on the distillery team, but it celebrates the fact that the building that houses Journeyman was once a corset factory as well as a horsewhip factory. Corset's Whips and Whiskey is a wheat whiskey bottled at 58.5% ABV, and the nose is aromatic and warm with red apples, peaches, honey, and a hint of vanilla. The taste is peppery and intense with touches of black pepper and a hint of clove that dominate the palate, then fade slowly to reveal touches of red apples and peaches. The finish is long and spicy. Now, this one has won a number of awards over the years, and I'm scoring the latest batch of Journeyman Distillery's Corset's Whips and Whiskey a 93. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit, a 150-time award-winning Maryland-style rye whiskey. With a determined focus to create the best rye whiskey imaginable, Sagamore's team of distillers crafts each spirit with a nod to both tradition and innovation. Find their signature, Double Oak, Cask Strength, or Reserve series of ryes, as well as their line of premium rye whiskey canned cocktails at a retailer near you. Visit sagamorespirit.com/find-rye. Please drink responsibly.
Gabriel Cardarella again, here to tell you about the all-new Dewar's 12-year-old Scotch Whisky. Crafted by Dewar's four-time IWSC Master Blender of the Year, Stephanie McLeod, the new Dewar's 12-year is now double-aged in first-fill premium bourbon casks. It's full of red apples and peaches on the nose, Hints of lemon zest and floral notes and subtle spice that'll expand into an incredibly lush, fruity character before you hit that long, creamy finish full of butterscotch and vanilla. It's no wonder that Mark and the good folks at WhiskyCast gave this whiskey a 94-point rating. Just what you'd expect from the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey, Dewar's.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Scarabus, Islay Single Malt Scotch Whisky. I mentioned the Irish whiskey export data on social media this week, and Ian Bruce posted this comment. That's excellent news for Irish whiskey, which has had some tough challenges in the past. I wonder if remaining an EU member will help grow their market in the future. Really need to make a visit to the Republic and the North, as never visited. Well, keep in mind that the report covers both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, which left the European Union along with the rest of the UK during Brexit. The status of the border between the two remains a sore point on both sides. If there's something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always look for me on social media. Just check for WhiskyCast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, or just email me. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Scarabus, the Islay single malt from Hunter Lang & Company that celebrates all of Islay's natural gifts in one bottle. Only those who seek shall find Scarabus. Start your search at hunterlang.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. What's the best-selling whiskey in the world? You might think maybe Johnny Walker or Jack Daniels. In fact, the top 4 selling whiskeys in the world all have one thing in common. They come from India. Thanks to the Malt Whiskey Yearbook, we have sales figures for 2020 for the world's top-selling whiskeys. Diageo's McDowell's No. 1 is the number 1 when it comes to global sales, with 25.7 million 9-liter cases sold in 2020. Pernod Ricard has the 2nd and 4th spots on the list with Imperial Blue and Royal Stag, while Officer's Choice from Allied Blenders and Distillers ranks 3rd. Johnny Walker did come in 5th, followed by Jack Daniels, Jim Beam, 2 more Indian whiskeys in Hayward's Fine and 8 p.m., and Crown Royal rounds out the top 10. Yes, some of those Indian whiskeys do have a molasses base and are blended with imported Scotch whisky, but they still count on this list. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of all of our past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address, comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever go out drinking with a peacock? Always the same. Few too many, tail feathers come out, drinks get knocked over, bartender's not happy, night's over before it started. All I'm saying is, don't be the peacock in your group.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Me again, Gabe with Dewar's, encouraging you to seek out the new Dewar's 12-year-old and experience it for yourself. Until next time, friends, we wish you all the best from everyone here at Dewar's, and please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2023, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.